Right, well, welcome to part 2 of the Honda horizontal shaft engine disassembly and reassembly. In this chapter we're just going to put the whole thing back together. There are a few things in here we've omitted to include on account of not having the right tools here at the moment. So there's a fair amount of measuring we haven't included in these videos. They'll be in a reference book for you to work with. A bit of clearance measuring, piston measurement, bore measurement, we can work out clearances that way. Crank journal, big end measuring, we can work out clearances that way as well. And also we want to do a bit of piston ring to piston clearance. About the only measurement we've done in here is piston ring end gap, which we did with the feeler gauge, but the rest of that will be outlined. And again, this video will be chopped up into little segments for you to refer to as you do your work. But we'll start with a few details on piston rings now. So we're going to do a test, which is ring end gap. So I'll put a ring in there, that's the second ring. I'm just going to push it down with a piston a little way, and that will make sure, or that'll make certain that it's pushed down square, and we can get an accurate reading with a feeler gauge in that little gap there. Now we need that gap to be within a certain specification range, and the reason for that is because if it's too small, if that gap's too small, and the rings expand with heat, they've got nowhere to go, so they just end up welding themselves to the cylinder bore, which is basically your engine's trash. If that gap's too big, it can let all sorts of gases and so forth blow by, and then you have a fumey motor. So I'm going to find a feeler gauge that will fit. But there you go. That's 0.08 of an inch, or 0.2 millimeters. So that's one test we can do. To take them out, we take them out evenly, like this. We do the same process for the compression rings, for both compression rings and the oil rings as well. Now when we're fitting these rings, there's a couple of golden rules. This expander here has to butt up, if you can see the ends of it there together. If they're overlapped like that, no good, you destroy your engine. So they have to be butted up like that, and basically all we're doing is we're just putting them on like that. And of course we then go for the two rings here. I'm going to clock these, and I'll show you what I mean by clocking rings at in a moment. Now it's worth mentioning that we have a proper ring expanding tool at work, at school. Now, this is important, and it goes for car engines, motorbike engines, all sorts of things. I'm just going to clean these off a little bit. Top and bottom piston rings are very different from each other. Each ring has a dot on it, near the gap. One's there, and this one has it here. They're not on the other side. Those dots mean they face the top of the piston. Now, the top ring is the chrome moly one, the second ring is the black cast one, and we have to make sure these go in the right way. There's all sorts of rebating on them underneath there, which aids in scraping. That has to be the right way. If it's the wrong way up, it doesn't seal properly. So we can start with that dot, so we can start putting them in. And again, don't do it the way I'm doing it. Do it with the proper ring expanding tool, which I, like a dill, forgot to bring home. And then we go for the top one. Now we have to, before we put pistons back in, we have to be aware of thrust faces. And piston thrust is the natural inclination for the piston to kick over on the way up and down, and so you want to keep the gaps of the rings away from the thrust faces, and we don't want them where the gudgeon pins are. There's your pin in there. So we want the rings clocked like this and like this. We don't want them like that, and we don't want them like that. So I'm going to clock the rings, the gaps in the rings. So the oil rings, one gap's here, one gap's here. Compression rings, one gap is there and one gap's there. So you can see the rings are clocked. This top one's here, top one's there. The good thing about these, you can see the dot, so straight away you know if you've got it the right way. Now what we need to do is we need to bear in mind the arrow needs to point towards here, so the piston's actually going this way, and we're going to put it in. Now I'm going to use this. It's the wrong type of piston ring compressor. This is an automotive one, so it's doing, you know, big pistons like that thing uses, which are over 10 millimeters or 10 centimeters in diameter, 100 millimeters in diameter. So we're going to squeeze it up. Now the one we've got at work, the one we have at the college, was made up by Mr. Wilson and Mr. Platt, and it's purpose built for this sort of application, so it's much easier than using these. So I'm just going to put this in here, squeeze it up and drop the piston. I'll show you how you do that. Now before we do anything, we have to lubricate it, and you lubricate it with just engine oil. And I'm just going to make sure it's nicely lubricated, and also throw a bit of oil around in the bore like that. That way we know it's all nice and ready to go in. So the bit of the piston skirt's protruding there. We've got it in. We've got it pointing towards this channel here, and I'm just going to turn the crank down so that the journal part here is down the bottom. That way if it comes out on an angle, it doesn't mark up that bottom part. There we have it. Ideally, that piston should go down in one motion, not hit like I did, but sometimes with the wrong tools that's not always possible, which is really bad. Now, a couple of other things. That should move nice and freely. Now before you do anything, give it a squirt of oil all around the journal, and we'll just push our piston down into position like that, and then we can start putting this big end on. Again, always use oil. You must use oil. Just like that. And that will slip over. And if it doesn't fit snugly, it's not in right. So you cannot force it. If you force it, it'll break. Let's turn it around there. It's a bit easier to get these in, I just discovered. There we go. And we just tighten these up again. Now these mustn't be over tightened, and we've got some torque specifications on how to tighten them up, and we'll go through those when we're ready to, but for the purpose of demonstration I'm just going to nip these up. Very important we don't over tighten them, we do them to the correct torque, because that way they won't go out of shape and it'll all work properly. Now, if these things don't rotate smoothly, they're no good. And that's exactly as it should be. Nice and smooth and effortless, just like that. The next thing we have to do is to put this cam in. If you remember, we kept these separate. And again, we use a drop of oil. And just let them fall home like that. We also want to give it a drop of oil on each face, and also in the back there where the camshaft sits. And we take our cam out, unwrap it, and we're ready to go in. Bit of oil. I know I've already done it, but I'm a bit anal like that. Now this is where we have to time it. So we're at top dead center, almost, and we have all these little witness marks around here, but that's the one we're interested in, that one there. So we want to put it in, and what's happening is when we're putting it in on that line, is we're on the base circles of the cam, so we don't have to have anything pushed in down there, and we can just drop that in. Now, this is a helical gear, so it might take a couple of goes to get it timed the way you want it. Perfect. Don't forget, when you're looking at these sorts of things, those gears have to be flush there, and then you can get an accurate reading, because being helically cut, they rotate as they go down. Right, well, having done that, we can start putting it together. Now, assembly is pretty much the reverse of disassembly. It's important, we're going to reuse these gaskets. These gaskets are okay. With gaskets, it's a good idea just to keep rotating it until you find exactly where it fits. Double and triple check it. So we've got large holes here for the locating dowels, and we can start putting the crankcase in. Now I'm going to jump ahead a few stages because a lot of this is just the reversal of the disassembly. So I'm only going to sort of go through parts that are pertinent to or need special attention. Now, one golden rule when we're putting bits and pieces back like this, that's the crankcase bearing I talked about before, is there's a seal here. Very important, you never put a seal in dry. I'm just going to run a bit of oil down there, rub it around and in there, and that's now sort of moistened enough so that it won't chafe or tear on the way down. And we just go very carefully. There's a tight machine fit between that bearing there, or the inside diameter of that bearing, and that crankshaft journal, so we can just sort of lower it down very slowly. Never force these things. If they don't go on, there's a reason for it. And this one's not going on. I'd like to, oh, here we go. There we go. Perfect. You force it, you're asking for trouble, whoops, and it won't function properly. You'll end up with leaks and all sorts of stuff. I'm just going to use a speed brace. Oops. And I'll tighten it up later. Now it's a very good idea, once we've got the crankcase, the side crankcase on, give it a bit of a spin. With every stage of engine assembly, you should always just do a quick rotational check, just in the off chance something's in incorrectly or whatever. So now, the best thing to do now is to stick the cylinder head on. Give that a bit of a wipe. Now we're just going to stick this second hand gasket on, but don't forget that you're going to get assessed on how it runs when you finish. So we always put a new gasket in, but for the demonstration here we're just going to use this one. Now again, with head gaskets, particularly on cars, because there's loads and loads of different galleries and so forth, just try it the wrong way, try it upside down, whatever you want, until you know irrefutably that you've got it the right way. So we have here a hole for our push rods to come through. We've got the two larger holes here, two larger ones here than there for these two locating dowels, and also an oil return hole there. There are our head bolts. And here's our lovely little cylinder head, so we can just put that on now. Drop the bolts in, and don't forget, they're all the same length. And again, whoops, we're just going in a diagonal fashion. Now don't forget, once we're in the workshop, we'll have a torque wrench, a small torque wrench designed for this sort of thing, and so we won't be doing it with a spool with a ratchet like I have. I'm just doing this like that for now, but given that I've been doing this for over 30 years, I sort of know when to stop. So push rods are next. Now these have to sit, and there's no way of seeing this. There's a wide end and a wide end there and a narrow end. They go in the wide end and they fit in the follower and then drop down. And they should be easy to rotate. If they feel scratchy when you rotate them, they're in the wrong spot. So there we go there. I'm just going to put this up on a 10. Whoops. Which is the natural inclination to fall. And of course, drop of oil, and we can start to put these in now. Now these have two different ends. They have a sort of a punched end there for the push rod, and a protruding in there to run on the end of the valve. So we want to put those in. It's actually much harder doing this in the demonstration than it is sort of in real life. And then we screw these down. And again, it's critical we get these the right way, or at least the right amount down. Now if these are over tight, that means the valve's going to stay open momentarily when it shouldn't be, which means the valves can burn. They can burn out. Too loose and it's going to make a chattery chaff cutter sort of noise. Now I had the motor on top dead centre. I know it's on top dead centre. I can feel the piston there at the top. And I want these to have a little bit of clearance, but I'm not overly sure what the clearance is. Traditionally you do it in a car anywhere from 8 to 15 or 16 thousandths. I'm just going to make a guess and do this at 10 thousandths of an inch, which is 1/4 of a millimetre, and we can do that by sticking the feeler gauge under there. Might have to use a smaller feeler gauge, my car ones are too big. And then we want to tighten that so there's a bit of drag, not too much, just a bit, and then we can lock it off. And we lock it off with the spanners like that. Again, be very, very careful because these are very sharp, these castings, and you can cut yourself reasonably easily. And again, we just do them together like that and just snug them up like that. Being a cork gasket, be very careful with this. You just don't want it too tight at all. Now is a good time to stick the spark plug in. We just don't want any foreign matter getting in there, so these have a collapsible type washer on them. You can reuse it, of course, but the first time you do them they sort of seat and then they turn another 1/4 of an inch or so, 1/4 of a turn or so. This one won't, this will sort of seat and pretty much only tighten a little bit, but you don't want to over tighten a spark plug because they are a serviced item, and and they do need to be replaced from time to time, so put that in. Now's a good time, before we put this crankcase or clutch housing case on, it's a good time now to put this heat shield on. And the reason for that is this heat shield has a fastener, a 6mm bolt that goes in where the starter housing is, but it also has this other one that goes underneath. See if I can get the jolly thing in. It goes behind here and you can't reach that once the housing's on for the clutch. So now is the time to be putting that heat shield on. What I might do is just get another 6mm bolt, put that in there, oops, just like that, then I'll tighten these up, and that way I know that they're sort of tightening up in the right spot, because otherwise it can just become a headache and frustrating if you're not able to get to it later, like this one. This one's terrible. And so this is the housing for the clutch. So we're going to put that on. Very important, we're mindful of this and that we don't force it. Now this gasket on the back here sits over there, but it can dislodge, and if that dislodges you can cut it on the edge of that casting, and you don't want to do that. It's most important this is right, because don't forget the oil level in here and the oil level in your crankcase are completely different. The ideal way to do it is to sort of locate it with a bolt, or even more than one bolt, just like that, so you know with no doubt that's going to go down in the right spot. And then we have to be very careful when we do it up. Now I'm starting to tighten it, but I'm watching in here to make sure that that gasket doesn't dislodge, and if it does, you know, you have to stop what you're doing. These gaskets here, these aren't important. You can make these out of oil jointing, and we'll do an exercise on that. Now I'm going to start all of these, and they're free as a bird. I can feel how easily they're turning, so I know that that gasket's in the right spot. Now I'm using a very short extension on here. You want to be as close to the head of the bolt as you can get, particularly when you're using torque wrenches, because it's the most accurate you can sort of get. So the most accurate reading you can get. Now we've got to put this clutch in, and this clutch can be a bit of a challenge. So remember, we wrapped up this thrust bolt, or this thrust washer, here. And it can only go in one way, and it's that way. We don't want that machine surface running against there, because it's incorrect. It has to run, that shoulder there, which has a chamfer in it, has to run inside here. And that acts as a sort of a straight base for the clutch to run on, and also a bit of a slinger as well by the look of it. But anyway, we'll drop that on. And we'll cut this off. Now I might need my son to come and help me with this, because I don't think I can do it by myself. We'll take that out, and remember the clutch is all in bits now. But basically what we need to do is we need to put these in evenly. If you get one of these skew if or off, particularly here, it'll jam in this housing and it won't go in. So we need to get it dead square. Now I'm going to, because I'm by myself, I'm going to pull it apart. Now Mr. Platt will have something to say about this, because he probably has a different way of doing it. I'm going to pull it apart and reassemble it on the motor, because I think it's going to be easier because I'm by myself. I might stick a bit of oil just to aid it around here, and also on that shaft there. Now that slides on nice and easily, but this one here, should go nice and free. I might point that down a bit. And that should be just good. Right. I think we're in business. Never use steel, metal when you're hammering this stuff. Always use a nylon hammer. And don't do what I did and strangle it. You're supposed to use it down here. Now if I can prop this up to show you, the problem with working by yourself in a messy garage. Let me get a bit of wood. There we go. Now we need to get, there's a square drive in the end of the crank. We need to line that up. Can you see in there? I don't know if you can see in there. Just here. That's out, that's dead on. You can feel it sort of stops there. And we need to get that keyway in. That's this thing here. I can't see from here, so I'm just going to... There we go. Now that keyway is very important. That step there locks against the clutch. We'll put the clutch plates in now. So they just mesh in here like this. Followed by a steel one, and then another friction plate. Pretty strong looking clutch this. Of course, the more plates, the more surface area. Formula 1 cars have multi-clutches, and the other thing that gives them strength is the amount of spring they have or compression they have to hold them together. This one doesn't have much. It just has a bit of centrifugal force off these weights, which isn't tremendous. If it had big springs and a hand-operated thing like a motorbike, it'd be a lot better. Now you can see also here, there's the rebate there that square drive runs into. So when you put that on, it'll lock into position, and then you can put the retaining bolt in. Once again, rotate it, make sure it's all working. You can see there, the output shaft is actually running independently of the motor. This is a wet clutch because it's supposed to be filled with oil. Once these all kick down like that, it locks it together. But at the moment, we're slipping. Bit of weight on there, locked tight. Isn't that good? See, it's running independently there. But by rotating, you know these are all in perfect line, and that's how you need them. Now again, this is our demonstrator motor, so we're not putting a new gasket in. But we are going to put our locating dowels in. And, I cannot stress enough, always lubricate a seal before you put a dry shaft through it. So we're just going to stick a bit of oil around like that, and also run it around the seal. I actually use HTB, which is high temperature bearing grease on these, but that will just fit over there. And that should very easily slide in. Again, if it doesn't slide in easily, there is an issue. And we'll just tighten all these up, and again we'll go in sequence. So we'll go around the circle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like that, 8, 9. So we go all around in sequence to make sure that we don't do damage to the casing. Now it's critical that this coil goes on the right way, or at least it has the right amount of space between the flywheel, or the magnets going past on the flywheel, that's a bit tricky isn't it, and the coil itself, and that way it can induce a nice healthy fat voltage and ignite the fuel well. I'm just going to use a bit of spark plug blocks, and I'm just going to place it there for now, and then we'll just stick these bolts in. There's a 6mm bolts like the rest, 1mm pitch, but they've got a longer shank to sort of get through all these layers of ferrous metal, so to speak. I'm just going to hold that against there as I tighten it down. Just do it finger tight for now. I'm going to push that against there and then nip it up. So push down, give it a bit of a tighten up. Now that will have, I can't do it on the angle I'm doing it, but that will have a lovely small gap. Now you only want a very small gap between there, and you know it's right if you run that, that's the magnet there, and I'll run it past that coil and you should be able to see a spark there. Just in there. The closer you get it, the bigger the spark, but you need to have some clearance there. So that it's all good. We want to route this cable behind the casing there so it doesn't get caught in anything rotational. We'll pinch it down. Sorry about my dodgy camera work. I'm in the garage and it's night and it's about 8 degrees in here. But I figured I'd get this out of the way. Just like that, and then it has to sort of go through. There's a small hole down here. So we'll just thread that down through here, this hole here. And of course this grommet. And when Mr. Platt and I assess these things, we're going to look at things like grommets just to make sure everything is absolutely correctly fitted. There we go. And that's all good. And this is where we refer to our diagram we made before. And this is the one that we sort of put in before to make sure it all lined up properly. And it just saves so much work if you do that, because it just went straight in with no issue at all. Pay special attention to how cables are sort of routed. You can see that they're not going to get trapped. It just makes your job so much easier if before you begin something you really survey it carefully so you know exactly where you're at. Another one under here somewhere. There it is. And of course this is where we can now refer to the diagram we did before of where everything goes. Well, the black goes to the coil, that goes in there. And then this one here goes into the black lead of the capacitor, which is that one, and that goes into the crankcase. And again, you know, take a lot of care with these sorts of things, because it's very easy to break this stuff but hard to get it, and we've been sort of a little bit blessed in this workshop that we've managed to secure all these lovely industrial Honda motors for you to use new stuff. So we'll just put that in. That all sort of tucks away. And again, we've got our bits and pieces all bagged up. And again, of course, we will be using new gaskets, not these second-hand ones. But for our demonstration, I don't reckon it matters. What's this thing? Little crankcase breather. And that's the state that I got it in. And there we have it. Always at the end of each job, wipe the job off. And also, every tool individually before you put them away. Every tool needs to be wiped off. Then wash your hands and have lunch. So there you go, kids. All done. Hope you enjoy the unit and have a lovely day. See you later.